In the matter of moments in this airport, I went from being excited about going on a trip alone with my dad to having my entire life threatened. And it was every single aspect of my life. It was from the roof of my head to my eternity in heaven, to my family. I was just completely devastated in a way that I don't think a 15-year-old should ever have to feel that way. I grew up knowing that something was different about me, but not knowing how to put that into words or even express or understand what that was. I grew up in a very conservative household. My parents had us in what I now know to be a cult, a homeschool support system that was based in fundamentalist Christianity, that believed that it was essential for Christians to have as many children as possible. A quiver full of arrows is how they would describe their children. So I'm one of 8 kids, and I grew up in a situation that was a very, very strict Christian household, and with very strict, extremely strict religious beliefs. And I remember when I was about 15 years old, I saw a men's workout magazine in a grocery store and bought it, but hid it, knowing that my sexual attraction to men was outside of the norm or not to be accepted. So eventually, my parents found that magazine, and I didn't know they found it. It confirmed to them the suspicion that I might be gay, and that I didn't fit into the role of what a good Christian boy looked like. He explained to me that they had found this men's workout magazine, and that being gay is a sin, that finding somebody of the same sex attractive is a sin, and that he was taking me to this therapy center to cure me from being gay. But he also, at the same time, made it very clear that he said, I won't have a faggot as a son. And he said that if this didn't work, that he would either send me to military school to make a real man out of me or kick me out of the house. Everything was on the line for me in this therapy. I bought into everything that these therapists talked to me about for the next 2 weeks. They told me that God hates faggots. They told me that they talked about Sodom and Gomorrah, and that God rained fire down on homosexuals, and that who knows, maybe he would do it again, but for now that he had sent the plague of AIDS to kill all the gays. And that if I continued down this path of same-sex attraction, that I would die alone, unloved, and of AIDS. That there's no joy or happiness or hope for gay people. And that the only hope is to be fixed from it. I didn't want to go to hell, I didn't want to die alone of AIDS, and I didn't want to be homeless or kicked out or lose my family. And to feel that no one could love me, even God, at 15 years old was just, I don't know another word, I keep saying devastating, but it was devastating. And so for 2 weeks, different therapists sat down with me and had various forms of talk therapy. We did exercises that were designed to figure out where my homosexuality or my same-sex attraction tendencies, as they call them, came from. And at the time, there were a lot of widely accepted beliefs in the Christian church about why people are gay. And some of those are things like that it comes from being sexually assaulted. And so I was interrogated about whether or not I had been sexually assaulted or molested as a child, and I hadn't been, but they didn't seem to believe that. So the therapist asked me about my dad, about this uncle, about that uncle, specifically asking me about men in my life that might have sexually assaulted me and then resulted in my same-sex attraction. And Again, I was very sheltered growing up in a homeschool cult, and so sex was very new to me. I hadn't discussed sex with anyone outside of a very brief discussion about procreation and sex for the sake of procreation. So suddenly being asked if my uncle had touched my penis before was shocking. But again, I never questioned some of these really intimate questions because this was my only hope, was working with these therapists to fix me. Some of the other things that they said might have caused my same-sex attraction was the idea that there's generational sin. And so maybe my dad had suffered with some form of sin, or my grandfather. And so they had me do worksheets where I would confess the sins of my forefathers. So I would, if I knew that my uncle had cussed too much, I was supposed to write that down. If I thought that, my grandfather had a tattoo, which tattoos are the devil too, by the way, I was supposed to confess that. Whatever it was, but then a lot of those things I didn't know of my grandparents. And so they said that I hadn't done enough, and they wanted me to speculate on things that might have, that my relatives or grandparents or parents might have done. One of the other things that they told me was that being too close to my mother or to women in my life might have resulted in me being more effeminate. That might have caused my homosexuality. Some of the therapists at this center continued to work on this masculinity training with me. They wanted to make sure that I didn't cross my legs. They wanted to watch me walk and make sure that I walked like a man. They wanted me to stand like a man. They verbally beat into me about the way I talked and said that I was too feminine sounding. And some focused deeply into faith, and they called themselves a spiritual warfare counseling center, and they believed that demons and the devil are what influences you to be gay or to watch pornography or to whatever kind of spiritual warfare you have going on in your life. And so there was a lot of discussion about the correct ways to pray, and we prayed many, many times a day. They talked about how God can do anything, and he designed man and woman, and a lot of fundamental faith practices that I knew from growing up in a very conservative church. But this simultaneously with also being taught to hate myself deeply associated that faith with the trauma that I was going through. And then another counselor was really focusing on a sexual side. He really seemed intent on finding out if I had had sex, how often I masturbated. He asked me to tell him the size of my penis. Just very, very intense sexual questions that I now realize were wildly inappropriate for a 50-year-old man to be asking a 15-year-old boy. And I find that ironic now because I think that society still, especially this conservative Christian fundamentalist part of society and the government even, is still obsessed with queer people's genitalia and sex lives. But at the time, I wasn't going to argue or push back on anything because I just wanted to be able to go home. All of my therapy is what's known as talk therapy. But conversion therapy can take a lot of different forms. And so there are early histories of conversion therapy of trying to cure queer people from being gay or trans, included things like chemical castration or electroshock therapy and physical torture. There are still people who have practiced forms of physical torture in what's called aversion therapy that's being practiced mostly not by licensed professionals that I know of, but it is being practiced behind closed doors, where children or the patient or even an adult who's putting themselves through conversion therapy are hooked up to car batteries and shown pornographic images and shocked when shown a gay image versus a straight image, or dunked in ice water as part of their conversion therapy practice. I can't imagine the level of trauma that I would have gone through had I had more physical elements to it. There are people that have claimed that their conversion therapy worked. Many people have claimed that, and then the majority of those people have later come back out of the closet or ended up dying by suicide. I dove deeper and deeper into church as a result of conversion therapy. The church I grew up in had an altar call at every ceremony or every service, and would call people up to pray and confess their sins or whatever. And I just remember every single time they asked people to do that, I would be in tears and crying and up at the altar praying for God to fix me, because my sexual thoughts, specifically sexual thoughts about men, were constant, and I hated myself every single time I had those thoughts or those feelings or those urges. So I spent my life in a constant roller coaster of emotions that seemed to be heading downhill full speed. That hatred was closer to me. It was more a part of my life than my family or my God. My self-loathing was part of every day of my life. I was also terrified of going to hell. And every time I looked in the mirror, I just wished I was not there. When I was 16, I tried to kill myself.
I see you